Well, hopefully we're up and running here. I had a misfire a couple of minutes ago, but it looks like the camera is operating properly. Good evening, good evening, good evening. And it is another episode of The Miracle Within. And we are working with A Course in Miracles. Pardon me. And as you might recall, last week we did a little special for Thanksgiving, trying to come to a different understanding of what it is that we are thankful for, and seeing the universe through different eyes, through more awakened eyes, and stepping out of the mundane. So kind of continue with some of those ideas as we advance here. One of the things that I thought I would put a little bit of emphasis on right now, as we're moving into the holiday season, there is a chapter in A Course in Miracles that really puts a lot of emphasis on the idea of Christmas and the birth of Jesus. And it starts off with littleness versus magnitude. And this is causing us to be able to actually recognize the difference between when we are relating to the ego or when we are relating to our own divine truth. And if we're in our truth, then we know that we are at one with God. And that gives us a state of omnipotence. We move into that arena of the awareness of our perfection within God, which will be always maintained on our behalf by God throughout eternity. If we shift gears and look at the world through the eyes of the ego, then that whole concept of vulnerability rises and has to be addressed, because that little ego and the little human body are very, very frail and fragile identities to embrace. So looking at chapter 15, we'll start off here with the first section, and it says, "Be not content with littleness, but be sure you understand what littleness is and why you should never be content with it. Littleness is the offering you give yourself." In other words, you created this identity, you created this sense of self that is defined as the ego, and that is pretty much the source of all your problems. You offer this in place of magnitude, and you accept it. Everything in this world is little because it is a world made out of littleness, in the strange belief that littleness can content you. When you strive for anything in this world in the belief that it will bring you peace, you are belittling yourself and blinding yourself to glory. Those are pretty immense ideas that we're starting to work with here. That trade-off of the lower self, the ego self, as opposed to the Christ self. And that's a big part of the struggle, is that we have created this identity and we cherish it. And we'll fight to preserve it, even though we know that the journey is doomed to begin with. Because as the old saying goes, I think it was Jim Morrison who made mention of the fact that no one gets out of here alive. So if you're a fan of 60s and 70s music, the Doors had some great tunes, and Morrison was a very insightful guy. So I think we're coming up on his birthday before too much longer. Anyway, to continue, it says, "You will always choose one at the expense of the other." So you're going to either sacrifice your divine truth in order to continue to perpetrate this illusion of a separate self, or you're going to be able to release that attachment to that identity and to begin to step into a state of being that really becomes very enviable for people who are outside the spectrum, as it were. So basically, when we arrive at a place where we're recognizing and acting within our truth, we slip out of this context of personal self. And all of a sudden, we can look at the world from the vision of non-duality. In other words, we're in this world, but we're not of this world. We're not anchored in that ongoing drama between good and bad, black and white, evil and sacredness, and all of the other conditions that continue to uphold the idea of a dualistic existence, a dualistic universe. It goes on to say, yet you do not realize each time you choose is that your choice is your evaluation of yourself. So how diminished is your sense of self? Or how expansive is your sense of self? Choose littleness and you will not have peace, for you will have judged yourself unworthy of it. And that's very much the nature of the ego. If you really sit with yourself and listen to the babbling of the ego, we are going to be observing this litany of self-criticism. 1 minute you're on top of the world. Look at me, I did this. The next minute, oh, I really blew that up and stepped on my foot and created a mess. So there's this constant criticism going on when you are embracing your ego. And that's what we're trying to lift ourselves above, is to start to step out of that alignment with the ego that we are constantly engaged with. So we at this stage are only going to be able to make baby steps, but that is the first and necessary step into liberation, into real freedom. It is essential that you accept the fact, and accept it gladly, that there is no form of littleness that can ever content you. And haven't you really observed in this world that all of these things you strive for, you put, you know, this new car on the pedestal, and you beat your brains out, you finally get it, and 6 months later, you're bored with it. And a year later, you're thinking, why did I buy this thing? I'm still making payments on it. And 3 years later, you're starting to look around for a replacement for it. It's very ephemeral, our sense of happiness, our sense of fulfillment and attainment in this material world, because we're always pursuing things that are a distraction, and they're distracting us from actually pursuing our truth. So all of those little trinkets and baubles and babbles that seem so important, that you have promised yourself is going to make you deliriously happy, after you get your hands on them, a whole different picture emerges. You are free to try as many as you wish, but all you will be doing is to delay your homecoming, for you will be content only in magnitude, which is your home. So again, you know, it starts with the body. The body is this sense of containment, and we cherish our body. We talk about what a miraculous thing the body is, and how, you know, this is one of the great miracles of existence. But when you stop and back off from that and start examining it on a deeper level, the body is vulnerable to invisible things. It can be taken out by a germ or a spore, or you know, a multitude of different types of contaminants. So really, for all of the wonder and majesty that we ascribe to the human body. The truth is, it's a very complex system that occasionally works perfectly. But remember that migraine you had 3 weeks ago, or that stubbed toe that you had that caused you to limp around and gimp around the house for a week? Well, that's the vulnerability factor. And when we step away from the attachment we have to this physical body, this physical presence, all of a sudden a different sense of existence starts to emerge. And that doesn't mean that you're living in it 24 hours a day, but when you access it randomly throughout the day, when you stop and do a little bit of meditation, when you still the mind, when you're out in nature observing a beautiful sunset or an amazing forest, hills and valleys and dales and glens, all of those things lead us back to the awareness that these things don't exist outside of us. They're reflected outside of us by appearance, but the truth is these are all things within our consciousness, and they're all things that we have a sense of connectedness to. And as that little self begins to expand and begins to get a little bit bigger, you start to actually have that feeling of connectivity to the environment that you are surrounded by. And as you continue to grow that sensation, grow that awareness, all of a sudden something magical happens. And we arrive at a place where we are literally the universe that we are surrounded by. We come to that point of complete understanding, complete comprehension that nothing can exist outside of our consciousness. So all of this that you imagine to be the world you're inhabiting is in actual fact a thought form that resides in your mind. If you want to change the world you inhabit, then change your thoughts. And that's not quite as easy as it may seem to be. So for me, and for a lot of students of A Course in Miracles, what we're content to do is allow the Holy Spirit, the presence of God that exists within us, to change those thought forms on our behalf. So we learn how to go into a state of prayer, which is a state of deep receptivity. It's not begging and pleading and having the expectation that, God's going to show up as Santa Claus and fill your stocking. But it is a merger with a level of awareness, a level of being, as it were, that is based entirely on love. So when we allow the Holy Spirit, when we allow God to intervene on our behalf, all of a sudden we are connected to this transcendental state of grace and love. The more we attempt to do this, the more we make this a practice, the greater the experience becomes, until all of a sudden you're shifting out of your old reality. You're shifting out of, that broken down 54 Chevy pickup with a flat tire that you've been limping or gimping around with. And you start to sense a bigger way of life, a bigger way of being. And that's what we're working on here, is getting rid of our smallness and stepping into a state of magnitude. There is a deep responsibility you owe yourself, and one you must learn to remember all the time. The lesson may seem hard at first, but you will learn to love it when you realize that it is true and is but a tribute to your power. You who have sought and found littleness, remember this: every decision you make stems from what you think you are and represents the value you put upon yourself. Well, now, if you're thinking that you are a body, and you are a bank account, and you are a health regimen, and all of these other very limited visions of self, you're really boxing yourself in with every decision that you make about yourself that embraces this sense of being that is very diminished, is going to pull you into a state of vulnerability, deeper and deeper and deeper. So all of a sudden, you're living in a state of defense. It's a flight or fight existence. And that's the whole core of the sense of separation that we have constructed for ourselves by creating a separate identity apart from our truth, apart from God. So it gets pretty ugly, really, as you undoubtedly have observed. There are a lot of instances where, you know, fear becomes a major factor in your existence. You're driving down the road late at night, all of a sudden flashing lights show up behind you, you get pulled over, you're afraid, you're wondering what you did wrong, you have this fearful response, and you get a ticket for speeding, you know, but that's all just the window dressing. At the core of it is recognition that this sense of separation is causing you to dip into that well of fear over and over and over again throughout the day. So, you know, you're walking down the street, the neighbor's dog comes running up at you, barking and snarling and snapping. Yeah, all of a sudden there's a lot of fear. You get the adrenaline rush, and it takes you the next 4 hours to calm down. Things like this are part of the ego's world, part of what the ego is masterminding to try and keep you under control, to try and limit your sense of self, and to try and basically manipulate you away from the divine, away from your sense of connectivity to God. So as we go on here, it says, believe the little can content you, and by limiting yourself, you will not be satisfied. For your function is not little. And it is only by finding your function and fulfilling it that you can escape from littleness. Now, we're getting into some foreign waters here. We have just crossed a line. What is it that our function is? What is it that we ultimately, at the core of our being, have as our mission in life, as the ethic for our existence? Well, the answer's coming pretty rapidly here. It says, there is no doubt about what your function is, for the Holy Spirit knows what it is. So the Holy Spirit is not a separate, disembodied phenomenon. You know, you really have to think about this. You really have to put on, you know, a different set of lenses in your goggles that you're looking at the world through. The Holy Spirit is a component of you. It is so intimate that it is indescribably connected to you, simply because it is a part of you. There is no doubt about its magnitude. So the Holy Spirit is going to illuminate you as to the magnitude of your being and your mission, for it reaches you through Him from magnitude. So when we're talking about magnitude with a capital M, we're looking at God. So your function is going to be channeled to you through the Holy Spirit from God. You do not have to strive for it because you have it. In other words, it's already inherent within you. You're just suppressing it. You're just not wanting to look at it. You're not wanting to embrace it. And you keep going back to that idea of my smallness, my little body here is going to make me happy. I'm going to feel rewarded. And you're going to walk to your grave with that kind of a thought system. Because as we all know, the body is vulnerable. It breaks down. It falls apart. And even with modern medical science, we're not really seeing anything that's a true indicator of eternality. in association with the body. The body simply is not going to function in a state of perfection for that long. You get 100 years out of it, you've had a good ride, you know. And there are all the stories of people in various remote places around the world that have, you know, astonishing purported lifelines that go 160, 250, 300, 400 years. But really, think about the last 10 years or 20 years of your existence, and then put that into perspective. Would you want to be inhabiting a body for 200 years? Would that really give you a sense of satiation, fulfillment, enrichment? Or would you start at some point to think, there's got to be more than this? There's got to be something bigger than this inane journey that I'm on, where I'm constantly protecting the body and constantly maintaining the body, and, you know, doing all these trivial little things, painting the body, dressing it up in fancy clothes, putting baubles on it. That really is at some point going to become tiresome, rather than something that you're fully engaged in, something that gives you a sense of joy. So all your striving must be directed against littleness, for it does not require vigilance to protect you, your magnitude in this world. In other words, you don't need to protect yourself. You need to protect your body, or, you know, the neighbor's dog is going to take a chunk out of your butt. But the truth is that the real being that you are doesn't need protection. It is omnipotent. It is omniscient. And it is an eternal state of consciousness. So nobody can hurt you. You are not vulnerable when you are relating to yourself as you truly are. To hold your magnitude in perfect awareness in a world of littleness is a task the little cannot undertake. So you have to start to expand the sense of who you are. You have to work on this sense of identity. You have to be willing to lay aside this little personal me for a couple of seconds, 2 or 3 times a day. You know, just stop being Joe or Marianne or Henry or Babalu or whatever. Kill the brain. Let the brain come to a place of cessation. And all of a sudden, something occurs. There's a subtle shift. There's a feeling of expansiveness. So you're no longer limited to your fingertips. You're no longer limited to what your vision can see, you know, or what your eyes can see, I should say. You know, because your eyes can see down the street, but they can't see around the corner. You know, your ears can hear the grinding noise of, you know, somebody backing over your fence post, but it has a limitation. It has, you don't have the capacity to hear what's happening on the other side of the world. So all of these limits that we have put upon ourselves with our identity are things that we have to be willing to set aside just for a couple of seconds, 3 or 4 times a day. And that starts a process just like germinating a seed, you know, and that little seed that is in the depths of the soil, in that state of darkness, once it starts to feel the warmth, it starts to be attracted to the surface. It starts to expand itself. And suddenly it breaks through. And that's the journey that we're on with A Course in Miracles, is that we are going to come up out of the soil. We are going to experience a resurrection, just like Jesus did. And we are growing into a different state of being. And we are being fed and cultured and conditioned and motivated by the greatest power that has ever been, the power of the divine. And it has always been here within us. So it says, it is asked of you in tribute to your magnitude and not your littleness, nor is it asked of you alone. That's an interesting thought. The power of God will support every effort you make on behalf of his dear Son. And here we're switching back to that idea that none of us are separate from the Christ. So when you start your journey, when you initiate these processes, when you get into reading A Course in Miracles, and when you start doing the lessons on a daily basis, you're not just impacting yourself. You're not just fixing this little person that you thought you were. All of a sudden, your work is done on behalf of all of humanity. And even beyond that, all of life. So every deer in the forest, every buffalo on the plain, every dog down the street, every cat in the kitchen following you around, hoping you'll drop some milk. All life is going to be benefited by this seemingly tiny little effort that you're putting in to embracing the light, to connecting to something bigger and broader and more beautiful. It says the power of God will support every effort you make on behalf of his dear Son. Search for the little and you deny yourself his power. God is not willing that his Son be content with less than everything. For he is not content without his Son. So God is restless. He feels, or he, she, however you want to imagine it, feels itself being incomplete. And that incompleteness is because you're sleeping. You know, you're laying there on the floor having a dream about being chased by lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. And yet at the bottom of the dream, you're going to have to wake up. So he is not content without his Son, and his Son cannot be content with less than his Father has given him. So just, you know, the beginnings of this tiny, tiny little shift that you can make on a day basis, on a 10-day basis, on a yearly basis, it is going to afford you the most amazing experience. And you are going to start to participate in a process that is so unimaginably magnificent that it will leave you without any desires apart from just fulfilling this journey back to awakened consciousness that you are initiating with A Course in Miracles. So anyway, for some reason, I'm not seeing an awful lot of stuff showing up on my feed. I'm hoping that the video isn't going to turn out to be a dud, although I've had that happen, but I'm pretty confident that we're going to make this work tonight. Anyway, it was wonderful sharing with all of you people, and get out there, move around, interact with the world, and be invulnerable. Be willing to embrace the world through the eyes of your own divinity. Don't be afraid of having your body get mutilated. You know, I mean, that happens to all of us one way or another. But we can also rise above that, and we can heal the body. We can generate a higher way of living. And so next week, we're going to continue with this journey of looking at the end of the year and the shortest day of the year, the renewal of the sun, the renewal of life, and how we associate that with the arrival of Jesus, who came into this world just like you and I, but who listened to that Holy Spirit within, who was able to sit with himself and allow that perception to bubble up, to well up from within. And that's how the Course in Miracles works for each and every one of us. So see you in 1 week. We're entering the season of light. Keep a candle handy, you know. We've got Hanukkah and Christmas and Diwali and all these wonderful festivals this time of year. And it's all about the light, and that's what we're embracing. So get out there, share the love, pass the love around, and I will speak with you in 1 week. Bye.